Just want to have a little chat about net zero power, net zero carbon first and foremost. So, how we're going to implement those.
What are your thoughts on net zero carbon and net zero power? You've been in the sustainability field for quite some time. What are your thoughts?
Welcome to EngiNerding Out, where sustainable building design gets stripped to the studs, with Daniel and Kartik. High Performance Buildings Decoded. This is the podcast for people who know details matter. Buildings are sexy.
So, in terms of net zero carbon and net zero power, they sound pretty similar, but there are actually some differences between them. So, in terms of net zero power, it's about the amount of power used by the buildings being equal or less than the amount of renewable energy on site. So, what this means in practice is being able to reduce your reliance on the grid and be sustainable, right? So, it's very much towards our strategy that we're putting in over here. And I see us doing that primarily with solar panels and then also geothermal that we were in discussions with carbon capture.
It's important to explain that as a concept, right? Because, like you said, net zero carbon and net zero power are completely two different things, right? We are net zero carbon because we don't use any gas in our buildings. But in the grand scheme of things, yes, it's very important to reduce carbon emissions. Climate change is very important. At the same time, building resilience, where you don't need to be dependent on the city's infrastructure to provide grid capacity for your multifamily building, that's net zero power. And that's the ultimate pinnacle of sustainability, and which is what we are trying to basically figure out, right? And so it's very complex in the sense that how do you turn a building net zero where you're essentially don't need to be connected to the grid, right? Daniel, do you want to take a stab at what are the different parameters that probably contribute to making a building net zero?
In terms of net zero power, I know what we've looked at so far was primarily geothermal and also solar. So just talking about doing solar panels for a multifamily development, we recently had that call where we discussed that we'd be able to supply about 25% of our total power using solar panels, which is actually a great step in that direction because that means that at least for these type of size of buildings where you'd have, let's say, 10 to 12 units, having 25% of that power just provided by solar panels is actually a great way to start stepping towards this goal. I would say that that's a great way in the short term to get that into motion. And obviously, we talked about geothermal, which is really another big application. You can even have a massive battery storage bank, which would in turn work also with the solar panels. So you can just have storage for that power. Let's say if it's not sunny, or alternatively for geothermal, that there's some months where you're drawing more power than others. Being able to reduce your reliance on the grid with battery storage means that even in events where there's less sun for a few days, you saved all your power. And then when it's time to start using that power in the winter, typically, which is our peak loads, you'd have that storage capability, and then you're more resilient, also avoiding any regional power outages, anything that would affect other buildings nearby, and potential disasters that's with electricity grids going down and things like that. You're basically able to jumpstart your system no matter what the conditions are. And also, you're less sensitive to spikes in the cost, any fluctuations in the grid price. So you're basically future proofing your design in the case of any inconsistencies.
Daniel, I also want to ask you, right, being on the client side, right, what's the experience like in dealing with the utilities?
I would say so far dealing with the utilities, it can be pretty inconsistent. You don't want to name any names specifically, but it takes a lot of coordination, a lot of delays back and forth just to get the lines put in the first place. And you can also be forced to do transformer upgrades, and all of these can take time and money. When you're already going to be investing in it, you are at the liberty to basically decide how you're going to implement that starting from the ground up. Net zero is a great opportunity for multiplex. You're going to need a transformer. There's already some investment there. You'd be spending money anyways upgrading the power infrastructure. So there's a lot of room to be strategic with that.
Bingo. And that's what sustainability is, right? It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. If you're going to spend the money in upgrading the infrastructure that you need for the building anyway, it's a lost opportunity to not look at building design and see if it makes sense to put in some solar panels and some battery storage for that amount so that you actually reduce that dependence on the grid so that you maybe don't need a transformer, right? That's a pretty kick-ass use case. That's our motivation to honestly go net zero power, because what my hypothesis is that a lot of net zero power being able to get there is exactly in solar panels and battery storage and some of the technologies like heat pump technologies like you're describing, right? People do triple pane windows, beefing up the efficiency in the windows. People beef up the efficiency in the building envelope, making sure your building envelope is airtight and that type of stuff. I mean, these are things that we already do in our buildings, right? These are good design practices in general anyway. But I think that the way us as a developer, we're going to have a skin in the game is by essentially trying to get to net zero by dictating user behavior, right? So we go out and tell our tenants, hey, don't put your thermostat down below 20 degrees right now because there's a lot of stuff going on in the city. You know what I mean? And let's just try to reduce our load on the grid. Or at a system level, we can put our units in low power mode, right? During these peak seasons, we have the ability to do that, right? Through all the smart devices that we have. Right, Daniel? Like we can actually put our heat pumps into low power consumption mode. There's multiple ways of doing it, but you can actually just do it in the software too. You know what I mean? The software that we have all the access to, but you could also go to the individual units and just program them during peak. So we can put the units into the low power consumption mode, or we can limit the set points through our software. I think what we want to ideally have the tenants do is actually take the responsibility amongst themselves because they understand the impact of the behavior that they're having. One of the things that I'm actually thinking about we do is we actually gamify sustainability in our building. If you're using less energy in the building, then we should be giving you a reward for using the least amount of energy, right? Because that fits right into our net zero strategy. If you're using less energy, I think that the biggest contributor to energy usage in a building is actually human behavior. We can get the human behavior to not use that much energy, right? Because they're setting the thermostats the right way, and it's programmable stats, right? Where in the morning the temperature goes up to 72 or whatever, 21 degrees or 22 degrees, and at night they're maybe sleeping at 20 or whatever it is, or it goes up to 25 in terms of Celsius. There's programmable thermostats that we're providing anyway, and we're basically giving our tenants the ability to do these automations, right, through our SmartThings platform. So basically, I think we have the opportunity to dictate human behavior. And I think what we're going to find is that our buildings, just because they're built really well with all the solar panels we've got, with the battery storage that we're doing, and with very strong interventions on human behavior, tenant behavior side of things, right? I think that we would be operating at net zero majority of the year, right? And maybe sometimes we need to pull from the grid.
It's powerful, really, what you said about limiting the tenant behavior in a way that's actually positive reinforcement. They're basically gamifying it. Sustainability, it needs to be a cool thing to do to get people to adopt it. And it's really easy to pay lip service and all that. But I like the way that SDG and our development side is really putting the sustainability forward and thinking in a way to make it fun and engaging. Like you said, with the heat pump side of things, being able to have independent climate control and even in some cases, heat recovery for larger buildings, which is a great advantage from the traditional kind of boiler chiller. If the person isn't home, they'll have access from their phone that they can have the temperature that they could appreciate by the time they get there. And they have that peace of mind rather than stepping out for a few hours and just leaving the AC blasting the entire time because they want to get home. And those are some of the things that you can gamify and make it rewarding because they can actually make improvements from their phone when they're not even home. They're having sensors on the windows that would notice that the windows are open when they're trying to use the AC and maybe gently nudge that tenant.
100%.
What we ran with so far was the difference between net zero carbon versus net zero power. We've talked about already battery storage, solar panels, and heat pumps. And finally, we'd like to talk about the local AI model for the community that'll really tie all of this into place.
So you want to talk about that conversation?
The way that we want to lead the charge in terms of AI integration with our buildings, which is really a big buzzword, but what I want to do is demystify it and show how it's not just a bunch of marketing, but we're actually going to lead the way with this. And we've done this by partnering with Samsung for the appliance side of our units. And the partnership revolves around their service called SmartThings, which is a tenant-facing interface on your phone where you'll be able to control everything from the washer dryer, your refrigerator, your stove, and also, like we mentioned earlier, you can control your heat pumps. There'll be an air purification system, smart blinds, smart lights. Like we said, the SmartThings is going to have interface with the data collection and AI, and this is going to be super powerful because, for example, the fridge will be able to tell you when the food is about to expire.
you can turn the lights red. Even if the stove is on and somebody does touch it, it actually just feels warm. It only works with induction, super energy efficient and really good for pets and all that stuff. If sometimes kids and cats climb on the counter and, so that they don't burn themselves. The use case on our washer dryer actually is like it's preloaded with 40 loads of fabric softener and detergent, and you could be out and you just press a button on your phone and your washer dryer basically comes on, right? And you come home 3 hours later, your clothes are ready, washed and dried. And that's an amazing use case.
Right. And that in itself is heat pump as well. So there's a lot more energy efficiency associated with that as well. And really, I'm excited for all the things that we have here. And
Yep.
even with our entry system, security is really the paramount for us. And we've also partnered with One Valet. So we have a really great 24-hour security outside the building, just so that we're making sure that the tenants feel like safe and secure. If they want to be entering all without their phone, they can definitely do that. That's really another great advantage of the One Valet entry system. So we really want an AI focused experience, tech focused experience. From the second you enter the unit, you'll already have your door open from your phone. You can set the climate the way you want. You can set the unit the way if you want the blinds open, if you want the blinds closed, the lights on, the temperature to whatever level that you want. You want to start, let's say, look in your fridge and see what food's there and plan your meal. And that means that the value that you get when you're home is as comfortable and convenient as possible.
100%. In terms of us being, I wouldn't say they're AI focused. I would say that we're using tech to enable simple living, right? You get what I'm saying? It's in the background, right? Tech is all in the background. We're giving it to you on your fingertips to basically make it simple and easier for you to live. Because at the end of the day, our developments are about health and wellness, right? We want to make sure that our tenants that are living in our units are having good conversations with their neighbors and relaxed and enjoy the atmosphere, are outdoors and doing all sorts of cool stuff. And they know that they're living in a net zero basically building at obviously competitive rents, having this amazing experience where the landlord actually cares about the tenants and cares about the building and cares about operating the building the right way and really focused on creating a community amongst the tenants, right? So that somebody, your neighbor can watch your dog or your kids and people are playing in the park together and people are talking in the espresso bar, right? And basically the technology in the background is facilitating that and enabling that.
Like you said, it's a very future focus, but with a focus on building still a family environment where people can be safe, a community living, and not putting the computer ahead of the person. It's supposed to serve the person and get out of their way, essentially. So it's about using the computer, any technology in a way that it actually helps our tenants. They go out, did I leave my stove running? There you go. You can check from your phone, right? You don't have to like turn the car around and go check
The
that,
unit
right?
go into relax mode, right? And the unit goes into relax mode, right? And starts inviting TVs as standard, which is acting as a hub to a lot of the communications. There's a lot of kind of intricacies in the smart home component side of things. But you know what, Daniel, I'm actually very excited about this idea of local intelligence. Near future, we're going to be investing in infrastructure to essentially start running this locally. So rather than this going into the cloud through a mesh network of what needs to happen within the unit, eventually we want to get to a place where it's actually being done at a local level using a local LLM. So it's not going into the cloud and then coming back. And there's some very exciting opportunities, right? Because especially for net zero, then the amount of compute we can do to really have that building intelligence layer, we have a lot of power available because, we're net zero building. And so now we have all of this power, and the amount of power
Yeah.
we need is very little for being able to run a local LLM, right? That's already world class and really be able to localize intelligence, providing a free service to our tenants where they can get access to this local LLM that is incredibly good at the local things, right? At the building level side of things. And it's learning because everyone else is contributing to it.
You're protecting their data, you're
You're
keeping
protecting their data.
everything
Exactly.
locally. And a lot of people are concerned about the huge data centers and the amount of water that they consume. And when you run everything off a local machine, you really mitigate those negatives. And what you're left with is a system that works for the people, puts the technology in place to support you rather than forcing you into a box. Because a lot of people are so fearful of AI and these upcoming technologies. And you answered a question of how we're going to do this in a sustainable way.
Exactly. We start localizing, right? And hey, maybe people are going to find that our local AI that they use is better than ChatGPT just because, I don't know, right? Hey, If you just want to know what the score of the match is, yes, your local AI will actually be able to tell you that faster. You know what I mean? Just because it is going to have a harness that collects information. That's an interesting thing to ponder over, right? It actually have latest updates of what's happening around the world. I don't know, but it's going to be, I think maybe the local AI is only set up for local systems for now, you know what I mean? And doesn't really connect to the internet. But hey, at the end of the day, here's what I'm thinking. If you can do most of your tasks locally, and then you only need to go to the internet sometimes to fetch some very niched information, it might be where the future is.
Just because you're running the model locally doesn't mean that that model can't reach out externally for a future first developer building this from the ground up. That's what we're really on the forefront of developing.
Cool, man. What a great conversation.
Thank you again, Kartik, for your time. I hope we chat again soon and we see all the progress we make towards these sustainability goals.